Hello and welcome to You Matter. My name's Ned Burwell. I'm your host and the founder of You Matter. Today I'm here with my friend Catherine Cannon. Thank you for coming on today, Catherine.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
It's wonderful to have you on the show here today, or to do a post for You Matter. Today we're going to talk about the topic of grief. Catherine is a grief specialist. What got you interested in grief?
It was a very personal. Well, I've always been interested in people's reactions to death and people's lack of comfort with the topic of death and so on. And but the whole grief program that I work with kind of was inspired by my personal experiences of loss. Back a few years ago, I had someone who disassociated from me, someone who meant a lot to me, and I thought we were this, and she clearly did not. And so she disassociated from me, and I went into a complete tailspin. Crying, I was like walking around the streets of town, bawling my eyes out for probably 2 years. It was like she was in my head, really in my head, and I couldn't figure out where I'd gone wrong with her. So, she was a family member actually, and so on the heels of that, my dad died. And when my dad died, I was still grieving her more than I was Dad, which was kind of weird, and I was feeling very guilty about that. And so when, we were all crying about Dad, I was actually crying about her. And so it was a while after that someone gave me the book called The Grief Recovery Method, which is kind of a precursor to the program that I teach now. And it explained a couple of things. First of all, it said that your grief depends on the incompleteness in the relationship, for which, in the case of this person, it was very incomplete because I didn't know what had gone wrong. Mm-hmm. With Dad, I felt there was completeness in it. And it also depends on the uniqueness of the relationship. Every relationship is different. Mm-hmm. So I loved the book, and it also addressed some sort of sociological stuff about how the ways that we handle grief in our culture just aren't really helping us.
That's an interesting point, though. The way grief comes up is relative to the incompleteness of that relationship.
That's right.
That's an interesting point.
It's very interesting.
So if I'm grieving the loss of somebody who I have a difficult relationship with, it may be a more difficult for me to overcome that.
That's right. And especially if the person's died and there's no hope now, the relationship is kind of, the relationship does continue on beyond death, which a lot of people don't realize. They think, oh, that's the end of that, the person died. But if you don't have a chance to set it right with them, then sometimes that's really hard. So I just love the whole premise of the book and how we need to relearn a lot about what we do with grieving, and how we latch on to these old sayings and concepts that really aren't even helping us, like time heals all, for instance. And it doesn't. It simply doesn't. If you just sit and wait for something to be feeling better again, you gotta have process.
That's right.
And time with process. Of course, it takes time, but you can't just expect time to do it all.
What are the things that you have learned through all your training and the work that you do with individuals and groups?
Well, for one of the most important things is that grieving is normal. People come to me with their really sad stories and they say, I don't know what's wrong with me, I just can't seem to get over this. And I say, well, you know what, given what you've gone through, and given the fact that you have very little in the way of tools to deal with it, it's no wonder. I said, if you weren't feeling like this, there'd be something wrong with you. Grieving is normal. And the medical profession and society in general tries to pathologize grieving and tries to, well, let's prescribe this thing for you so you don't have to feel this pain. But my belief is you got to go through it. Okay. The only way out is through, right through the middle. So when I have people come and do this, it's a program, it's an 8-week program that people learn with me. And we just have to go right through the middle. And one of the first things I tell them also is that crying is not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough.
Okay.
We're meant to cry, right? Our bodies, you know how you feel when you try to hold in the tears.
I'm a crier.
It doesn't feel nice. Me too. We're meant to cry. And so it's releasing of hormones, and there's always that. At the end of crying, you feel like, oh, I had a good cry. Did you have a good cry? Yeah, I had a good cry. And it's like, it's like that.
Okay, so we identify we're at grief, we cry. What's after that? What do we do next?
Well, the program that I take people through, first of all, the first part is kind of three-part in a way. The first part of it is they just cry. They tell me their story, and if they want to cry, they do. And if they don't want to cry, that's okay too. And the second part of the program, it takes a couple of weeks to kind of get this through, is to debunk a lot of the stuff that we have thought erroneously, and to debunk a lot of the things that people have said to us, and to debunk the idea that you have to be strong and keep a stiff upper lip and all those things. So then the third part of the program is where we get into the meat of things. And so we do a review of their life, first of all, of the things that have happened in their life. So for a lot of people, this is a new experience. They're identifying all the joys and all the losses.
Okay.
So when the grief work will not only address the loss of someone dying, but it also addresses a lot of other losses that we have. You know, relationship problems. There's grieving in that, right? I always say to people, anytime you're feeling stressed or unhappy in any way, that's grief. And so this program will address that. So we look at their whole life, and they try to identify, first of all, the messages that they've received that have not helped them, the ways that they've been taught or not taught in a way to deal with grief that hasn't been valuable. And then they look at all the symptoms of grief that they're experiencing, which are normal, which they sometimes don't realize. And then they try to identify the relationships in their life where the most emotional energy still exists, and the most pain and the knife in the gut kind of reaction.
Okay.
And then ultimately we pick one of those relationships. Sometimes they know right off the bat what relationship they're going to address. If someone has died, and they just know right away that's the relationship they want to work on. But sometimes we get looking at their life and we realize that it's not really that relationship right there that is troubling you now that really we need to work on. It's that, maybe that parent relationship you had, or that sibling relationship you had way back then. If we do the work on that and learn some tools, then that will help the current relationship. So we really do address three big points in these relationships. We talk about any regrets you have, any places where you might want to apologize to the person, or not that we would ever say go and talk directly to the person.
Yeah, because you can apologize through a letter that you write that you never send.
That you never send, because this work is done here.
Okay.
Right? You know that there's things you can't change. You can't change what happens, and you can't change the other person. But you can change a whole lot of what's going on here.
That's right.
So if you make this apology in your heart, then sometimes you don't even have to address it with the person. And sometimes you're apologizing for things the person didn't even know, right? Like, I want to apologize for thinking you were crazy.
Okay.
Or thinking you were horrible. Or why would I want ever to tell that person that that's how I thought about them, right? So sometimes it's not helpful to any relationship to go and tell. We really do keep this stuff very much in your own head.
See, I support introspective work in the sense that it sort of puts things up for review, questioning beliefs, and I find it interesting, this process that you take people through. So after the initial shock and acknowledgement of I'm going through something, I'm grieving, we cry, then we start to look at my beliefs around my grief? Is there things that are not true? Is there adages running through our minds that aren't really helpful to the grieving process?
Oh, for sure.
So, and then we get into the, you say the meat or the heart of dealing with grief, and that's where we're starting to look at the dynamic of what's not healed or what needs to be healed in this. Great
exactly.
information. Great.
Exactly.
It's a steps towards.
It is, and it's kind of a tangible, workable thing. We have workbooks, and people actually go through the workbook. So, so then you've got the forgivenesses, the things that you need to forgive in that relationship. To me, this is the biggest part of the whole thing.
Okay.
The forgiveness. Because people hold resentment.
Now, what if I'm grieving over something, and then I find out that I have these other areas that need healing. This grief has brought up things, but I can't forgive that person.
You know, I always suggest to people that, first of all, forgiveness is not something that just happens like that, right?
That's right.
Forgiveness is a work that goes on in your own mind. And it's in forgiving this person that I talked about earlier. I went through so much. I'd say to my husband, well, I think I turned the corner on this, I'm forgiving her.
Okay.
And then I think, oh, I guess it didn't really happen. So it was like 2 steps forward, 1 back.
Yeah.
Round and around we went until finally I thought, oh, she's not living in my head anymore. I'm not thinking about her at all. Finally we got to the point where I can look this other person in the face and think, I like you.
Yeah.
And have a nice conversation, a few laughs, and then say goodbye and then not think about her again.
Sure. Yeah.
So I know that forgiveness happened, right? But it didn't happen just like that.
That's a great point.
It is. And if people resist forgiveness, well, first of all, people will say, why should I forgive him? Look what he did to me. And I say, well, you came to me to find a way to feel better about yourself and to have a better life. You're forgiving him for your own peace of mind. If that lets him off the hook, then why do you care now that you have peace of mind?
That's right.
You know, you're hanging on to that. And you're, you know, that whole saying about it's like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. Resentment is, and yet I think there's something a little bit maybe instinctive about resentment and revenge and those things. I think these are things we sort of learn and try out as children. Maybe it's part of us. But I think, you know, we have to get beyond that and say, well, I need to let myself off. I mean, you see wonderful documentaries about people who have forgiven the person that killed their daughter, murdered. People have forgiven this, and they're asked, why would you ever forgive him? Look what he did. And they say, I couldn't live with it anymore. I couldn't live with that pain of resentment. And so I just had to find another way. So people, you know, there's lots of myths around forgiveness that aren't even true, right? You know, if I'm forgiving someone, then that means I condone what they did. Well, no, that's not true. But, you know, you see, what happens with this work is that people start to, I see a new light go on in people's eyes. I do regularly. As they start to get a different perspective and realize the power they have. Like there's power, there's empowerment. You know, you think, oh, I've admitted my wrongdoing. How can there be empowerment in that? But there is, because suddenly you're not a victim anymore. You're a survivor. And you know what you could do differently next time. So there's power.
I wanted to take you down that road for a few minutes to talk about forgiveness. I think it's a topic that a lot of us, like a lot of people, struggle with, and you know how to get there. So in your experience with grief and dealing with people, what are the main things that people stumble with and hang on to?
You know, I find that people, once you really start to talk about forgiveness and how much peace of mind they'll have, they can forgive other people's wrongdoings toward them. Eventually, without, you know, they can move toward that. It's when someone has done wrong to their loved ones. And this is the place where some people say to me, I don't think I can forgive that because they hurt my children or they hurt my parents. And then I say, well, you don't have to. We're not ever going to tell you to do something in this program that you aren't ready to do. You can even say in this, eventually we do a statement where they express all these thoughts out loud to the universe, not to the other person.
So we're not just talking about somebody who's passed on and we're grieving their
No.
loss. We're talking about grief.
All sorts of relationship problems. They say there's 60 different kinds of losses. I haven't actually sat down and made the list, but a lot of them are things like loss of expectation, loss of trust, loss of faith, loss of confidence. And when you get rejected by someone, often you see people have a real loss of confidence. And I always think that a lot of the people that come to me say, I feel like I've lost myself. And I also see that they have lost they don't believe in their own lovability anymore. They think, if my own partner, husband, whatever, rejected me, or if my own father rejected me, then how lovable am I really? And so I see this real woundedness in people because they've lost their own belief in themselves. So ultimately, after they do this program and have picked this relationship, and so the third part of this, the apologies, the forgiveness, and then the just expressing what they feel. And it could be negative or it could be positive. One lady said to me, I feel like I've tried to say this in as nice a way I can, being appropriate. I said, do you feel that way? She said, no, I really hate this guy. I said, well, say that. I said, I have no problem with 4-letter words. Stick a few of those in there if you want to. That's not an issue for me. So ultimately, they read this statement out loud. And there's the magic that happens at that point. There's this sense of lightening the load. And you can it's almost perceptible. They can almost see this lifting and this sort of, and I've done many of these myself, this exercise, and I have had different reactions. And once I had a reaction where I had read the statement to my mentor on the phone, and I just felt this huge lightening, and I got up from the chair. And when you go to the chiropractor, do you ever have a sense of lightness when you get up from the chiropractor's bed that you just feel like you're kind of walking on air? Well, that's how I felt. I went down my hallway and I felt like I'm just kind of walking on air. So it was immediate. The reaction to this work does not always happen with that kind of immediacy. It takes time. Sometimes it takes people a few weeks or months to start to think, oh, I think I'm in a different place now. So ultimately, the relationship that's the most important, I guess, is your own relationship with yourself. So people sometimes come back for some further work, and sometimes it is, let's work on your relationship with yourself, because that's the one you need to forgive yourself. You need to take ownership for the things you've done and be forgiven. And you need to look at what you love about yourself, and you need to look at the things you're not pleased about with yourself and express all of that.
So when I look at what you do, in a sense, you're helping people explore themselves to learn to discover what needs to be let go, and what we need to embrace to bring a healthy balance back into our lives.
Yes.
And so just to cap this off, if there's what would you recommend if somebody's grieving right now out there and they can't get to see you or your therapy program? What would you say to them, and how can we inspire some hope into their life?
I guess really one big piece of advice would be just let your emotions be what they are. Don't fight these emotions, these sadness emotions. We are supposed to feel sadness also. If we don't have a balance of sadness and happiness, then we're never going to grow, right? So there's a kind of paradox in it that if you let the emotions be and kind of almost embrace them in a way, then they'll dissipate faster. And I think it's partly cultural. We're taught from a very young age, don't be sad. I don't want to see your sadness. If my grandchildren come to me, this is kind of before my being a little more enlightened. If my grandchild comes to me with an injury, they hurt themselves, what's my first instinct? Oh, come on over here, Grandma will give you a cookie. Or, look at there's birds out there. But I don't do that anymore, because I think, no, why should I undermine their emotion? We are entitled to our emotion. And people fight this. They fight this sadness. They fight the pain. And yet, just let the pain be what it is. Don't fight it. You've just created yourself another problem. You've judged your own emotion. Now you have another problem.
Yeah.
So just let it be. And one of the best examples of this is that my dad died 10 years ago now, 10 and a half. And my dad was a lover of music, especially Mozart. And so I'm driving along one day, this was, 3 or 4 years after he died, driving to Stratford to visit my daughter. And this piece of Mozart comes on the radio. It's a piece from The Marriage of Figaro, or one of those operas that my dad loved so much, and it just really got me. And music can do that, right? So I just started weeping. And I almost embraced that. It was like, oh, I'm loving this feeling of knowing through this pain that I'm still connected to my dad. There's still a relationship. And I'm thinking I'm kind of savoring it. It's like this bittersweet wrapping around me of this pain and grief. And with the knowledge that I'm going to get to my daughters, we're going to go on with our day. I'm going to let this moment be past, and I hope there'll be another one, because I kind of liked it. So I think if people, that is a big thing, and I think that actually speaks to some of the work you're doing with people with depression and suicidal thoughts and so on, is that they're fighting those. And if they could be okay with them, they would dissipate more quickly.
Yeah, and not to push it away so much as just be with it without letting it overtake them.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
and it really does. And not to say that I've got my life all figured out. There's times when I'm going through stuff too, and I've racked my head. I think, how am I gonna? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, right, I have the tools. I teach the tools. I can use the tools.
Yeah.
So then I just kind of go through the process of this work, and I know what I need to do. But sometimes I don't want to. Sometimes you want to sit in your pain, and sometimes you want to participate in your own pain.
Yeah.
Don't you?
Absolutely.
You want to wallow. You want to feel self-pity. But, there's a way out of that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to do this talk
welcome.
with me. I'm looking
been a
forward
joy.
to what it's going to do for the community. Thanks again.
You're very welcome.